one of the coolest things has been meeting all these people all over this area with very different backgrounds, very different education levels, very different beliefs sometimes, but at the end of the day, they don't want to look out their window and see a clear cut, right? And they also understand, everyone, I think, in the area understands the value of trees for our future, right? The value of forests for our future. So I think that Hoosiers have this ability in some ways to listen to each other and to grow, with each other.
Welcome, Wild Ones. I'm Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. For this episode, our guest is Rachael Himsel, an award-winning writer, producer, and educator. Rachael Himsel has spent years working and volunteering in Bloomington, Indiana, where she received her master's from Indiana University. She's contributed to the Writer magazine and Culture Week in the past, and in 2015 founded Women with Guts Production, where she's now going to be executive producer of the forthcoming film Saving the Hoosier, the Fight for America's Forests. Welcome to the Green Root Podcast, Rachael.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. So, listeners of Green Root Podcast might be somewhat familiar with some of the stuff going on in Indiana in terms of forest protection and threats, and we'll certainly get into some of the specifics there, but definitely want to start off and focus on this film that you're producing, which sounds super exciting and is right up my alley, and I'm sure the alley of all of our listeners. So tell us about Saving the Hoosier, the Fight for America's Forests.
Sure. Well, I came to this from knowing many of the activists involved with the Save Hoosier National Forest movement, and really was inspired by Andy Mahler, who I think has been on this show before, and just was a tireless forest defender. And his energy inspired me. Also, the fact that the battle was going on for the Hoosier National Forest, that I learned of 2021. That's the time when our 30-year period ended, when the forest had been protected from commercial logging, right, for 30 years. Thanks to Andy, thanks to Jeff Stant, thanks to Bob Clawwater, others who really led that movement, which became some of the, some really groundbreaking legislature that kind of led to other states kind of following the lead and taking a more protective stance on our forests. The time was up in 2021, and that's when I kind of got involved and just started learning more. And then it was about a year ago, a little over a year ago, Andy emailed and said, I do have stage 4 cancer, and the battle is still going on. And that kind of is what pushed me to get on the phone with him, someone I truly respected and admired. And I said, Andy, is anybody making a film about this? And I'd never made a film before. I've done a lot of theater work. I've written a lot. But he said, no one, people have talked about it, but no one's doing one. So I called my friend David Yosha of Magnet Films in Indianapolis, who's been in the industry decades, and he met Andy. And of course, to meet Andy is to love Andy, right? And so he really saw his passion. And so the film is as much about citizen voice, the importance of citizen voice, especially in these times, as well as the environment, right? Which that's, I think, one of the few areas maybe we have really common ground. So what's been interesting as I've been working on the film is I've really gotten to know a lot of policymakers, some of whom I'd already known or met before, but just had the opportunity to interview Governor Braun for this, and so there's really this nonpartisan movement to protect our woods, right? And so that's what this is about. It's about interviewing people Hoosiers who care, and maybe even teaching you what a Hoosier is if you all don't know.
So that's a good place to start. Yeah, what is a Hoosier?
But well, that's actually a question that I asked a lot of my interviewees, and I
Okay.
love the answers. And a lot of them, a lot of them talked about hardworking. A Hoosier's just someone from Indiana. That was the most straightforward answer, right? Someone from Indiana, and there are a lot of stories that are pretty funny, actually, if you look them up online. Some of them, just stories about how we possibly got the name. And so I think a lot of people also talked about their family members that one interviewee said her father was a Hoosier, hardworking, determined, honest, and those are the words I think that most Hoosiers really want to be aligned with.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think this nonpartisan aspect is really important. And the fact that it can bring in a lot of different folks. So Indiana Governor Mike Braun, he's not necessarily some leftist hippie tree hugger, is he?
Well, I mean, I think he deeply cares about the forests. I think he deeply cares, and he describes himself as an avid outdoorsman.
Mhm.
So, and he is. So, I'll tell you quickly a fun story. We did the interview at the governor's mansion, and he's incredibly knowledgeable. He's incredibly smart. He's a very smart and funny guy. And he really had a lot to say about the history of the Indiana forest. And, I've done a lot of research. At this point, when I interviewed him, I'd done about 9 months of interviews and research. And I hadn't come across a data point that Indiana was 95% forests when settlers came here. So, and a lot of the settlers, they were my great grandparents, that kind of generations back, were really good at cutting down trees. Okay. I'm from Jasper, Indiana, which the water tower used to say nation's wood capital on it, right? And as a kid, I thought, oh, we're a little full of ourselves, aren't we? And then as an adult now working on this film, so many years later, I'm going, wow, we did produce a lot of wood. We're still producing a lot of wood products. And just because we're good at it doesn't mean we should continue doing it, because if we've done it to an unsustainable place, we have to really look at that, look at our resources and how we view the forest. So I would say Governor Braun really cares about the forest. I can't speak for him, but in my interview, I got that feeling. And
Mhm.
then the fun thing was actually he was leaving the interview and we happened to be walking out at the same time, and he was wearing a camouflage shirt and I'm related to about half of probably a solid half of Dubois County, and he's from Dubois County, where I'm from. And yes, we say Dubois, not Dubois. And I said, and he actually, I went to school with a bunch of my siblings who are, I'm the youngest of 11, Josh. My family knows him and went to school with him. And I said, in my family, there are some hunters. My brother Ed is an avid hunter and really good at it. Can find more morel mushrooms than almost anybody I've heard of. And the governor also likes to mushroom hunt. And so he was leaving, though, the interview, and he had his camouflage on. And I said, are you related to any Himsels? And then without a beat, he goes, why? Because I'm dressed like this. And it was the funniest thing because I was like, well, that is how a lot of people in my family dress. But no, I think that the governor really cares about the forest, and I think it's complicated, because you can care about something, but also know that there are people who care in a different way
Yes.
or whose income may be linked to it. So
Right.
it's something I think, any elected leader has to be sensitive to, the livelihoods of people. But yeah, that's a long answer.
No, that's a great answer. And I just think it's rare and super important to get folks across the spectrum engaged in this. There's nothing about the natural world that keeps us all alive that really should be partisan. I don't know why it turns into that, but whatever. But you have a really long list here of people that you interviewed and people who are scheduled to interview for the film. And maybe, yeah, do you want to mention a few other people who you could talk about a little bit?
Sure. So besides Andy Mahler is one of the heroes of this film to me, and so is Governor Braun, I think, and so is Julie Thomas, who's a Monroe County Board Commissioner, who is one of the voices saying, "Hey, look, when we're logging and we're burning near our water source, our sole drinking source, drinking water source in the Bloomington area, and also in near Patoka Lake, where Jasper is, and is also planned for prescribed burns and logging. These people are saying we have to look at what the Forest Service is doing and the impact on our air and water. So we interviewed Julie Thomas. We interviewed Jeff Stant, who's the past executive director of the Indiana Forest Alliance and just an incredible hero of the story as well, I think. And we also interviewed scientists. And one of my favorite things is that, people have come to me and said, well, why aren't you listening to the science, and we are, and I'm interviewing scientists, and we interviewed a hydrologist, PhD in hydrology. We interviewed someone who works for the United States Geological Survey. And basically they've said, we don't have enough data. Like, for example, in one of the areas they want to log, there is no baseline. Like, the government has no baseline for these streams and rivers going into the lakes, right? So the point is, you can't really say that there's actually science either way on the effects of prescribed burns or on the effects of logging because there's no baseline, right? So we did interview Dr. Sherry Mitchell Brucker, who is she is the head of Friends of Lake Monroe. She's the president of Friends of Lake Monroe. So Monroe County Board of Commissioners here in Monroe County, and Friends of Lake Monroe and Hoosier Environmental Council and Indiana Forest Alliance are the ones who were involved in this legal battle, which that's what the film is about as well, is this legal battle, which as of September, a federal judge did actually issue a halt work order to the U.S. Forest Service after the third lawsuit. And so, which isn't, it's a win. It's a win, but it's also like not quite a win because the final judgment hasn't been made as far as what the plan is. So we did definitely talk to a lot of people involved directly with that, the lawsuit. So with those organizations, we did invite the Forest Service to be interviewed. They respectfully declined. And I will say though that, we've attended protests outside of the Forest Service offices, and the staff has been incredibly kind and gracious. And there hasn't been, some of them have just been, they've been the most peaceful protests, and I really appreciated that. So that's kind of a sampling of who we've interviewed: scientists, and activists and policymakers.
I think that's a great broad brush. And it is unfortunate that the Forest Service didn't want to take part because, yeah, the individuals in the Forest Service, I don't have any problems with them. The agency itself leaves something to be desired, in my opinion. And here they're being given an opportunity to tell their side of the story and they're declining. Well, that's their choice, right?
Right, right. And it might have been due to the legal issues. I'm not sure. Because if they were involved in legal issues, I don't know that, but they did get back to us. And we did actually, I should say, we did interview, excuse me, a very long interview with a retired U.S. Forest Service advisor. So we do have kind of that voice, and definitely, and I've invited others. I've actually been on the phone with loggers
Yeah.
and had very totally pleasant conversations. One logger I talked to didn't want to go on the record, but told me, we talked quite a bit about the shift from logging to ecotourism, and or just to tourism, right? And because Southern Indiana is beautiful, and he actually has an Airbnb. He's making some income because we are shifting to that tourism model, right? And I said, well, wouldn't you rather be working in maybe a safer industry? Because I knew at the time, and still, logging is one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet, right? Being a logger. And so I brought that up and I said, isn't it one of the most dangerous jobs? And he immediately said, again, without a beat, he said, well, second only to underwater welding.
Right.
So,
Yep.
and I'm laughing, but it's really not funny because people do die, they get
Mhm.
injured, they lose, they can lose a limb because these jobs are dangerous, and and there are far less dangerous jobs to do.
That's for sure. Yeah. Well, that's great that these people are given an opportunity to speak and they speak if they want to. I do believe in every perspective has at least some validity, with some perspectives having more validity than others. But all of that's important. And it sounds like you're really doing your due diligence to get a broad brush, as I said. But at its heart, this is certainly a film that is seemingly pro forest, pro nature. and is documenting the activist movement, the advocacy movement, whatever you want to call it, of local people speaking up for their land. And yeah, Andy Mahler has a saying that I've been saying more often, and I make sure to attribute it to him. That he said that he's the forest fighting for itself, is what Andy had
Mm.
said. And I love that idea. We come from nature, and then we're that part of nature that's saying, let's protect some nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. He's the forest fighting. I'm writing that down actually. Yeah. I love Andyisms.
Yeah, I mean, I can show you the film where he says it, so you know it's real. But yeah, so this is all very beautiful, and it looks like you also have a narrator. And do you want to talk a little bit about your narrator?
Sure, I'm really excited because Hud Mellencamp, founder of Mellencamp Whiskey Company, is going to be our narrator, and we're also excited. We're going to be using some of John Mellencamp's songs, and that's just a dream, just because he's been the voice of so much. He's been the voice of the Midwest, the voice of hardworking Americans, and voice of farmers. He's gotten so involved. So I kind of feel like, between John and Hud, they're kind of emerging as not just the heroes to farmers, but to our forests and for the environment. But Hud, I've met him a couple times now, and he's really great. He's smart and funny, and very knowledgeable actually on the woods. And he told me a story because I was asking him, what if he had any special places he liked to go or what stories about the Hoosier, and he let me know that he actually met his best friend in the Hoosier National Forest as a kid because John Mellencamp's property is right by Lake Monroe. I mean, I've been on, if you go on the lake, you can kind of it's locals are like, oh, there's John Mellencamp's, and he was in the forest and ran into these other kids, and now they started their own business together. So just, people who kind of, who knows what happens when you meet in the woods, you meet fellow kindred spirits, right? And yeah, he's been great to work with. Yeah.
That's excellent. And so Hud Mellencamp's relation to John Mellencamp, the musician, is what?
Well, Hud's his son. Hud's his
Okay,
son. Yeah.
great. And yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna assume that most folks are aware of John Mellencamp. I'll just say my little piece about that as a musician and a huge fan of classic rock. I mean, he is a quintessential classic rock musician. He's still performing, still creating new music, but somehow his expressions just seem to come out from whole cloth. They just seem like the songs have always existed. Like I don't know how to even put it, but songs like Small Town, etc., they're Americana, and it's not even a cloying Americana. It's something that's just the essence and the heart of the best things in this country, and they're just damn catchy songs. And he just banged out one after another. It's like he can't miss. And there's, of course, the song Scarecrow, which tied into what farmers were dealing with. And that was always really impactful. Rain on the Scarecrow, Blood on the
Hmm.
Plow, kind of a dark minor key song, beautiful. And his song, Authority Song, there's a lot. I fight authority, authority always wins. That's one of the songs that I perform because I really, it resonates with me. And I sometimes change it. I fight authority. Authority usually wins. It doesn't always win. So, but yeah,
I love it.
just, I mean, the essence of American rock music, you cannot leave John Mellencamp off the list.
Right. No, he's a genius, and I will tell you that and you're the first to know, he is letting us use Rain on the Scarecrow. That was one
Awesome.
I wanted to request, and love that one. And there's another song, I don't know if you remember, if you know, because I really, listen to like all the songs. Do you Have you heard The Great Midwest? It was one of his, I think it
No,
was on his first album. I
I
can't
don't
remember,
think
but
so, but I'm definitely going to be listening to that after
yeah, it's
this.
a great song, and it's just, he was a lot younger, and it's a wonderful song, full of, I think, truth still today, and that's what you're talking about. I think is that his songs really stand the test of time because they're full of truth, right? And I do want to give a shout out to Jennifer with Clash Art Gallery because she's the reason we actually got connected. I went in to see his paintings, and are you aware he also paints, John Mellencamp?
I wasn't until I read something in your information. So that's great to
Yeah,
know.
he's in my opinion, a very talented painter as well. He's a very talented artist, and went in to see his stuff, and I met Jennifer and said, I'm working on this film. It would be a dream come true if John Mellencamp would let us use his music, and or narrate it. And so, and this is kind of my first film. I don't know what, he doesn't know who I am, or if he should trust me, but I emailed her that night. She said, "You know what? I'm going to talk to his manager soon." And she said, "I'll get the information to her." And she did. I emailed her that night. She forwarded it over. And then I got the call, and I was like in my backyard. I remember when Kathy called me, and I literally was in tears. I mean, because I'd been working on this film for a while, and we'd all been working on it pro bono. We are still to this moment working on it pro bono, not getting paid. So when you're doing something and you care so much about it, and then you find out, oh, and John Mellencamp really cares, and he really believes in this, and oh, and also now he's brought in his son and all that energy and connection. So HUD did agree. HUD heard about it and wanted to get involved and offered to narrate. So yeah, I want to thank Jennifer and Kathy because they have been instrumental in that connection, and took a chance on me, and took a
Mhm.
chance on a fellow artist, and I just really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And yeah, I know he was always a part of Farm Aid, so he genuinely cares about these areas, and that makes sense that that would expand into forest protection. So I love just in terms of knowing that somebody who has such a high profile thinks it's worth lending his name to. That shows the progress, I think, of course, of these movements. And I think that's an amazing thing. And he's a part of the community, wants to be a part of what's going on, and he's doing his part, and that's amazing. So that's
Definitely.
well. You mentioned funding or lack thereof. Is there not a way for people, if they wanted to help make this film happen financially?
Yeah, we have a GoFundMe, and you can find all that on savingthehoosier.com. Just savingthehoosier.com is where we have more information, and that GoFundMe. We're also partnered with Artists for Climate Awareness, a kind of new nonprofit, based here in Bloomington, actually, and really excited to be connected with them. So if anybody does want to make a tax deductible donation, you can go to Artists for Climate Awareness, and then that's a tax deductible donation as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, I definitely encourage people to do that. And I have the link in the description. Once you are listening or watching this, it'll be there by then. And so, yeah, we talked about a lot of the people that you'd be interviewing, the longtime forest activists and people like Andy who have passed away. People like HUD are going to be a part of that. So let's talk a little bit about you. So, what makes you care so much about this issue?
I thank you for asking that, and thanks again for your support, Josh. I grew up in the country, and I grew up with the woods right around me. I grew up with cornfields here and the forests here. And so I spent a lot of time in the woods. And my first club that I ever made, that I ever created, was called the Beech Tree Club because we had this stand of beech trees. So as a kid, I just grew up under trees and around trees and one of my favorite things to do is just sit in the nook of a tree and read a book, right? And so I've just always loved trees. But I also, as an adult, you learn more, right? And when you learn more, you try to do more. And I got involved, over the years, I've, just kind of volunteered here and there. I wouldn't say that I've been like a full-time environmental, you know, um, volunteer, but I was actually more of an arts advocate, an arts volunteer. And so, but over the years, I've definitely gone to many national parks. I love to hike. And I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm surrounded now by the Hoosier National Forest. I actually live like 8 minutes from Lake Monroe. And so I'm 8 minutes from there, and I love going to the lake, which is, nestled in the Hoosier. And so it's kind of something I probably took for granted, I think, just, growing up with so many woods around me, but not realizing until doing this work, really, honestly, maybe a little before that, watching, David Attenborough specials, et cetera. I'm a huge documentary fan. And David Attenborough is telling us, he's like, I think he was 90 or 91 when he made his last one of his, A Life on This Planet, which I highly recommend. I'm sure you've seen, and most people listening probably have seen it. But, we learned from him that, we've cut down half the forests in the world. And it's like, it's an emergency. And so that's kind of my relationship with the cause has been really influenced by learning more from people like David Attenborough, like Andy Mahler. And then besides that, I would say that I mean, my family has a long history with nature. My grandpa on my mom's side was a farmer, and my grandpa on my dad's side was a tree farmer. And when I was a kid, I remember thinking, gosh, people must pay a lot for Christmas trees, because I really thought that's what it meant. I thought, oh, he grows Christmas trees, and then later realized, oh no, it's tree farms. We look at it like a commodity, right? Which is something we look at in the film, because there's this very different way of looking at trees, right? Is it a resource or a commodity, or is it something living and something beautiful and something to be treasured? And for some, maybe it's a mix of both. I'm not saying it has to be either or. I'm sitting at a wooden table right now. I'm in a stick-built house. So I would say that definitely my family, and growing up in Jasper, Indiana, and being surrounded by the woods definitely gave me, I guess, a deep love of nature. And I'm just more comfortable there. I'm more comfortable in nature, like a lot of us, I think, but we, for some reason, don't get out enough in it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And as somebody who has grown up with trees around him, I do think that it does have an impact. I was talking with my dad the other day, who actually had gotten into forestry when he was younger, and he was trying to, he's like, I don't even know why I was doing that. And I told him, like, well, you grew up, it was next door with my grandparents' house. We're surrounded by forest. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I think you see trees, and this makes sense. This is part of what life is and should be. And then maybe you see them disappearing, and you're like, that's not right. That's as simple as it was for me.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So tell us a little bit about filmmaking. So what brings you into that whole kind of art?
Well, I think it's just such a great way to reach people, I mean, again, my background's in theater and music and art, right? And so I've done a lot on the local level, but I think, and plays are great at reaching people. There's nothing like live theater, right? In my opinion, but you can't reach as many people with a live show. And so I really felt like this is a national forest. It's the Hoosier National Forest, right? And so I think that, for me, I wanted to elevate the topic, and I do have a background besides the arts and education. I've also done some PR work, and so I think that video film is just such a great avenue to get your message out, and so that's really what I wanted to do, and to document this moment in time. So it's this is like nothing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, this moment in time, and I think that, there were people like Al Gore saying things like this, since a long time ago, and we kind of heard it, but then what's been interesting to me is that the idea that we can kind of be human ostriches, and I kind of was for a while. And I think a lot of us were like, oh, sure, things are bad, and I think that we're past that point where we all have to get our heads out of the sand. And we all have to kind of band together and learn more, right? So yeah, I think, is that a good answer? I
I think
think I
that's a
don't
great answer. Yeah,
want.
absolutely. Yeah, film definitely is very powerful. I still write things thinking that people read them, and sometimes they do, but more and more I'm convinced that film is really essential to any advocacy movement, really any sort of topic. It's really important to put things out there. It's a way that it's digestible, but you can put a good deal of information in there that's legitimate. You can see people's faces. It's a great medium. I should probably do more with it, but I don't know. I'm glad that people like you are doing it, so that's important.
Well,
So,
I encourage you. I already love your podcast, so who knows what else is inside of Josh.
right. Well, I think there's a far cry from just ranting on a microphone to making a film, but we'll see. But what I find really spectacular about this area that you're living in and that you're covering is that there has been this history of forest advocacy. It's not really something that happens in such a concerted way a lot of places in this country. There are definitely plenty of places where it does, but I would say more places where it doesn't. So, what do you think the secret is? Is there any secret that could be communicated so other areas can really get their stuff together?
That's a great question. And I've given that thought because, again, since learning, of the history of Indiana, the history of Andy Mahler, and I mean, this is what springs to my mind. And I don't know if it's the answer or but it's an answer. I really think, Indiana is the crossroads of America, right? We kind of have that was our state logo or our state motto for a while. And I think that it's physically that, right? Like we're in the middle of the Midwest, right? We're in the middle of the country, mostly the middle, and there's a lot happening here. Even though we're a we're a smallish state, smallish population. But I mean, I'm here in Bloomington. It's a Big Ten school, Indiana University, right? And so we have people coming from all around the world to study here, right? And it's an incredible city, incredible area, but it's also not so big, right? That you can actually have conversations. And one really cool thing about Bloomington is, I mean, because of the caliber of guests that we get at IU, of the movies, of the artwork, everything that we get at IU, you can meet famous people. I mean, Angelo Pizzo is here, lives here, and came from Indiana, and the author writer of Hoosiers and Rudy. So there's really special people who come here and then influence the conversation. But then there are also incredible people here who are highly educated and active, right? And so they're the ones who are. I would say that those people who have the academic background and also the heart live here in Indiana. And I also want to say though, you don't have to have that, of course. I mean, I think one of the coolest things has been meeting all these people all over this area with very different backgrounds, very different education levels, very different beliefs sometimes, but at the end of the day, they don't want to look out their window and see a clear cut, right? And they also understand, everyone, I think, in the area understands the value of trees for our future, right? The value of forests for our future. So I think that Hoosiers have this ability in some ways to listen to each other, and to grow, with each other, right? And to learn from each other. And I think that's true of humans. I guess it's not even just Indiana. That's what's special about Indiana. And I'll think about that some more. But I think that just the crossroads and the different cultures coming together here and the acceptance of that and the conversations.
Yeah, that's excellent. It almost renews my faith in humanity. People who listen to my podcast know I like to think of myself as a realist, not a cynic and pessimist, but maybe I am. But things like this, stories like this, very much inspire me and remind me why I keep trying to do this sort of work. And so, if only for the inspirational factor of this, I think this is incredible. But where are you in the process of making the film right now? Are you allowed to reveal the secrets of that?
No, I'd love to because I mean, we're almost finished with the filming actually. And so I'm working on the script right now. I'm the, executive producer and the writer and a co-director, kind of wearing a lot of hats. And David's been incredible, co-producing, co-directing. And we have a great camera guy, Alex. He's been awesome. Where we are is I'd like to pay everybody. And so again, I've been happy to do this. I hate asking other artists to work for free, and I've had to do it over the years in my work, working in a nonprofit. You call someone up and say, "Could you play violin at this event?" And I don't like it. I mean, artists should get paid for their work. We should all get paid for our work. So really, once we raise some funds for an editor, that's where we are, is we need to raise funds to get an editor. We could have this edited in January, February, and the goal is to have it out by March or April.
Whoa.
My kind of hard goal is Earth Day, is that I would love to do the premiere around Earth Day. Yeah, that's where we are in the process. I thought this would go faster. And part of the reason I thought it would go faster is I actually thought we'd fundraise faster and I could dedicate more of my time to this. But when you're doing it kind of in your spare time and you also have a full-time job and a life,
Mhm.
it's kind of difficult. So yeah, but I would say that, as soon as March or April will be when it's ready to come out.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's quicker than I thought it would be. So that's impressive. And you heard her, folks. Give her money so we can make this go quicker, so we can have this out there as soon as possible. The GoFundMe needs your support. So what would you say would be the most challenging thus far part of the process and the most enjoyable part, if it's not the same thing?
I think the challenging part was the learning curve for me because again, I have a master's in art education, right? And so I love science. I've taken some science classes. I took geology when I was getting my undergrad. And so I don't think I have to be an expert to do this, but I've talked to the experts. But there's also conflicting experts, right? There's conflicting science. And so that was really hard. And there was a moment, honestly, when like maybe a few months after getting into this really hardcore, I called one of the other lead activists and I said, are we sure that the Forest Service is saying this? Well, wait a minute. They're pointing to this, and he kind of talked me down. He's like, I have had those same thoughts, of well, let them do their job. They know best. And then, but if you look at the judgment from federal judge Tanya Pratt, she says that the Forest Service has failed to take a hard look at the environmental impacts, right? And then she goes on to show us, and this is what the plaintiffs, brought forth, which is they were using a 20-year-old study in it, and they were using a 30-year-old study, and one of them was like not even in Indiana. It was from an East Coast state. I forget. It was like Virginia or West Virginia. I can't remember. So I think that's when the hardest part was actually going, well, wait a minute, our government is supposed to tell us the truth and use the best science and use the best education, all that. And I felt like, I definitely wasn't seeing that, right? And so, again, no disrespect to the people who are doing hard work and important work, but there just isn't enough. I think there's just not enough. I don't know what there's not enough of time or money for them to do more research, to get more educated on the most recent, climate research. And so definitely talking with, the actual scientists made me feel better about kind of what the activists were saying. But at the end of the day, I actually would say that it doesn't matter what I think, because even though I'm making this film, I want people just to listen to the voices, right? But there definitely was a learning curve for me. And then I think the hard part was that there were definitely voices kind of, especially social media, just if I made a post and it was public, just, people saying, oh, you're wrong. The science says we need prescribed burns in the Hoosier. And I will tell you that, I spoke with someone, with the Forest Service, retired, and he said he does not worry about wildfire in the Hoosier. It's a wet forest. And he said, if there were a wildfire, I have complete confidence in our firefighters. So that's like an important thing that needs to come out, because they're saying, oh, we need to do this for this reason. And in the West, they're doing prescribed burns, and look at the West. It's a totally different ecosystem, you know that. So that was hard, was just kind of people kind of telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. And
Right.
and I guess my answer is, you know what? I kind of do know what I'm talking about now. I've talked to enough people and done dozens of hours of interviews now, and those people know what they're talking about, right? So that was probably the hardest part.
That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, you probably know more about this than a lot of other people, and you have a variety of perspectives on it. And the Forest Service typically has one perspective. And if folks want more of the science and the details, have at least two episodes about that on the Green Root podcast, specifically talking about that area in Indiana. So if you want to do a deep dive on that, we've got that on the podcast. And of course, it'll be in the film as well. So assuming that the science was not the most enjoyable part of making the film, what has been?
Oh gosh, getting to know the people for sure. And actually another hard part though, as soon as I answered that, I thought, definitely a hard part was losing Andy. I mean, we knew he, wasn't doing well. We were all praying for a miracle. And the governor called him himself, I think a few days before he passed. And Andy was just this, he was, you mentioned the quote earlier about, being speaking for the trees and he was a force of nature. He was nature, he was a force of nature and just so passionate. So that was a great part of this. It was just getting to know him, getting to know the other activists, Mary Beth and Stephen, Stephen's mom, who came along to all these different, events we were doing, and just the families who really got involved. And that was cool to see was, Robbie and his kids there, like this just multi-generational. It's not just, retired folks getting involved, which sometimes you see in volunteering, right? You see, people who have the time, they're volunteering for things they care about, and they're absolutely vital to this movement. But then also we're getting more people around our age and middle aged and they're also we're getting kids involved. And so that's been really wonderful to see is just like the different ages. On our float here in Bloomington, we had a Protect Our Woods float in the 4th of July parade. And we had I think he was 6 at the time, maybe 6-year-old ukulele player, and he was just playing and his dad is really involved with the movement. And so it's just been incredible to get to know the people, right?
Well, that's what seems to be the at least part of the heart of this film. It's certainly about the forest, but it seems like through the forest you get to the community and the people.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
That's really beautiful. Well, definitely sounds like a great film. I am definitely looking forward to it. Really encourage people to support it, even if it's just small amounts, or if you have a ton of money sitting around, give it all to Rachel, frankly. But so
Thanks,
love
Josh.
that. Anything else you want to say about the film before we get into our final question here?
Ooh, no, I just really want to thank everybody who's helped us. I mean, it's been such a labor of love and so much love. And I think that we need that. And I know we're going into the holiday season and it's cold outside and I just think that and it sounds cheesy, but I may be a cheesy person, but I think that, love is what's propelled this forward. And the film, besides celebrating, the trees and nature and our citizens, it's the love we have for each other and wanting future generations to enjoy the forests as we have. So I think that's it.
That's super cool. Yeah, well, it sounds like a great project, and I wish it a lot of luck and success. And certainly when it comes out, definitely going to do what I can to spread the word far and wide. But so
Thank you.
The Green Root podcast. So the essence of this, in theory, is that we talk about, at least at some point, what we see as a root, the root, whatever, of however you want to frame the ecological crisis. So that's the question that I like to ask my guests these days at the end of the podcast. So, Rachel, what would you say in your mind is at least a root, or you can name a few roots, or if you figured out the root, let us know of however you want to frame the eco crisis or an aspect of the eco crisis.
Yeah, well, it's a great question and it's so important and I've given it a lot of thought, even before this film, as we've heard stories about what's happening to our environment. And I just think it comes back to greed, right? Greed and envy. And I think that, it's always wanting more and wanting to go, go more and do more and build more. And I think that there's a moment where we have to say kind of enough is enough. And that's actually I came to this a while back. So like about gosh, how many years ago? It was right before the pandemic. Right before the pandemic, I was board president of the Arts Alliance of Greater Bloomington, and I attended like a community event, and there was a professor of economics, and I raised my hand. This was, before I was doing this work, and I was opening a new community arts center in College Mall here in Bloomington, and I said, I feel like in industries, we've built so many houses, we've built a lot of apartments, and we've done so much. And I basically was like, what's next? Like, I mean, is there a point where we kind of do stop and say, we've built enough, we've done enough, we have the infrastructure, let's fine tune it, but we're doing okay. We have a lot of roads, right? And I asked that question to a professor of economics at IU, and he said, well, what you're talking about is what some economists believe is the creative economy. And I've kind of been a little obsessed with that sense, and not many people have written about it or spoken about it, but the creative economy is, I think, where we are. And I think that's kind of the root of the solution, right? I think that what's happened is we've had either a lack of creativity or misguided creativity in so many ways in this country specifically, of getting really creative about ways to destroy and really creative about ways to make things, right? Well, let's get creative about ways to build things, right? And so that's to me what the creative economy is about. And the jobs would include, I don't know, being on TV, being on a reality show, which means that I think that, frankly, our president right now is part of the creative economy. And so I think that, it's about people, I mean, YouTubers, it's about the culinary arts. That's the creative economy, right? If you work in a restaurant, if you want to open a restaurant. So I think that creativity being channeled could really solve that problem of, the greed and the envy, I think is just kind of part of who we are as humans. I think there's something that, and sometimes it can drive people forward in ways that are really damaging. But if we kind of channel that creativity and that desire into something that isn't as destructive, I think that's the solution personally. And just heralding the creative economy, creative revolution.
I love
That's
that.
what I think.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a great way forward. And yeah, I fully endorse that. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the Green Root podcast, talking about your film and for putting out that film. I think everyone's going to benefit from that. And yeah, this place in Indiana, maybe people haven't heard of before, but I think they certainly will now. And I think it's relevant to not just that area, but the whole country and the natural world, wherever you are around the world. I think there's relevance to that. So I think this sounds like a great project.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Josh.
Absolutely.